Thank you so much for coming to this session. This is Complete the Path, and I'm Jana Weiss. I'm a longtime faculty member, administrator, retired provost from Eastern Kentucky University, and now I work with CPE, and I am a senior fellow. I don't know why they have to put that senior on there, right? I mean, no, everybody already knows that by being here, but I also am the director of the Kentucky Graduate Profile, and we work on embedding 10 essential skills into the curriculum across the state. And we believe that we're making progress that maybe other states are not making because we have a statewide platform. We have we have academy team at every institution in Kentucky that's public. That's 8 four-year institutions and 16 community colleges. And it's just been really exciting for me to work with these teams and to see what they're doing with embedding this in the curriculum. And, you know, we have some words like scaled, scaffold, and sustainable. We have some principles that if these are not in the curriculum, then we can't ensure that every student will get it. We have a description of maintaining high quality, relevant. You know we have quality, but we can always work on that. If it isn't relevant, students are probably not going to stay either in the institution or with the major that they have. They have to see a connection with how it's going to help them once they finish their degree, and for all students, and that's where the curriculum comes in. You know, I bet probably each of you has read something that someone's written, or you have known of them from a distance, and you find yourself quoting them or thinking about, well, how does that fit with where I am? Well, that's the way I have been most of my career with this speaker that you're going to hear today. And her name is Dr. Carol Schneider, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her and also tell you why her language and her demeanor and her message have been so important to me. And then you're going to hear a really inspiring speech from her. So Dr. Carol Geary Schneider is President Emerita of the Association of American Colleges and Universities, or in other words, AACU, which I'm sure almost every one of your campuses, I see heads nodding. She's a fellow of the Lumina Foundation, where she's working on initiatives related to equitable access to high-quality learning. Dr. Schneider is an early modern historian and has worked for the entirety of her career to ensure that all college students receive a broad and empowering liberal education, whatever their career interests or socioeconomic circumstances. She's received multiple awards, honorary degrees, and I encourage you to read her entire biography. She's widely recognized as a powerful voice and force for strengthening the quality of student learning in college for all students, and especially those who are historically underserved in the United States higher education. And although I had not met Dr. Schneider in person until about 2 years ago, her voice has been a great influence on me for many years. She was the first educator I heard to raise the question nationally about what happened to quality. And through her work regarding inclusive excellence, high-quality education, and now civic learning and democracy education, she's helped me to lead us to double our efforts, not only to ensure students graduate, but they leave with the knowledge and skills and abilities that we promise when they choose our institution. For example, and I'm going to show you, this is just a copy of the magazine that I shared with most every group that I have worked with over the years. Find that copy. We moved around a lot today. But it was a copy to the AACU, and it was what's happened to quality in this age of distraction. And the questions that she asked trustees to ask, such as, how do you know quality is on your campus? And are you looking at quality at different levels? And we've been, for the first time in my career, we now have 3 levels for all 10 essential skills for them to be assessed. We have a benchmark for when students transition from high school to college. We have a a milestone when they finish their 2-year education or their general education, and we have a capstone level. So would you please welcome Dr. Carol Geary Schneider, who has been gracious enough to come and share with us today, please.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jana. It's become a mutual admiration society. She's been more than generous in her remarks, but the fact of the matter is that when she explained to me what was going on in Kentucky, I thought, this is incredible. And I'm honored to be here to talk with you about the significance of the graduate profile effort that Kentucky has been leading. But before I go into that, let me just take a little census of the group. How many of you were in my session this morning? Okay, a couple. Thank you for coming back. How many of you are part of the graduate profile effort? You've been working on this in your own roles on campuses. All right, several. And how many of you have come because you really don't know that much about it, but you think maybe you should? Okay. And we've got how many faculty? Okay. And how many people who work with students but not as faculty? Okay, lots. Okay. So it's really a mixed group, and this is terrific. It's also challenging to actually pitch these remarks at the multiple levels of sophistication and involvement that you're bringing from whether you're working on student success in Kentucky or whether you're working on quality in Kentucky. The fact of the matter is you have a lot of knowledge, and part of my challenge is to help us think about how the student success work connects to the quality work and how it could be better connected in our work with students and more influential nationally as well. So because I was trying to pull a lot of things together, I've given you a handout, and while I will be using PowerPoints, please pick up that handout, which should be at every table. If you don't have it, who's sitting next to the pile? There's some left, yeah. Right. So who needs it? So we're going to talk partly via the handout, partly via the PowerPoints about 3 things going forward. Oh, how are the acoustics? Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good. And don't hesitate if my voice falls or this mic fails me, which it's happened earlier today. Raise your hand and let us know. So these are our topics. What does it mean to define quality learning for today's students? How do we braid quality learning into the student success initiatives that are the focus of Kentucky leadership, but also, frankly, a priority in virtually every state across the nation? And then I'll go deeper into one dimension of quality. I am now the senior advisor to the Civic Learning and Democracy Engagement Coalition. My colleagues have taken to pointing out there are no junior advisors. We're all quite senior advisors. But I will be going deeper into that and the way in which it can play a role in our thinking about and our practice of initiatives that relate to student success. Does everybody hear Tristan's remarks earlier, and for that matter, Aaron's as well? Okay, so I will be also picking up on some of that, because they both were introducing themes that are central to any discussion of quality. So historically, there really have been 2 discrete student success movements. The first has been, I think we could call it the attainment movement. You heard a lot about it in the first opening sessions, focused intensively on enrollment, completion, and on evidence-based practices that help students complete. And the sophistication of this movement is really very impressive. Just a huge amount has been learned through trial and error and the use of good evidence over the last few years. But there was, in fact, also a second student success movement, and that was coming from employers. Employers were saying, and you heard Aaron say it earlier today, you're graduating them, they don't have, and I loathe the term soft skills, I loathe it as a humanist. They don't have the competencies they need to be promoted and to do the work that we need to do over time. And we did a lot of work when I was at AACU with employers. I'll quote a couple of them. They would say, we do not want the people who have survived Microsoft training. They know how to do things in one way. We want graduates who will try every possible approach to a problem until they get it right. And we want people who will think outside the box. We want people who that's 360-degree perspective. And if they are locked into mental cubicles, they will not be promotable. They will be left behind. Our companies are fueled by innovation, and we need to hire graduates who can contribute to that mindset of innovation. I was interested to hear that entrepreneurship is what students want to do. I heard that in this morning's session. So they're all coming in wanting to be entrepreneurs because they've heard the message about innovation. But do they know what that means? They do not. And we need to be thinking with them and thinking ahead. So while employers were certainly the ones raising the issue of quality, as Jana has accurately said, when I became president of AACU in 1998, in junior high, would you imagine? I announced that this would be the new priority. It was very clear to me. I had been a vice president at AACU. We ran countless projects and meetings and summer institutes, and every year at least 1,000 people would write to explain to us what they were working on their campuses. It was very clear to me that there was a quality revolution going on, and it wasn't being named, and that part of what we should be doing at AACU is helping the field see itself in a larger perspective. And that's what I want to do today going into these handouts. I want to help you see that many of you may have gone to school, as I certainly did, on a notion of breadth and depth. The broad learning first, the deep learning second. Check it all off and you're done. The fact of the matter is that breadth and depth is being redesigned partially. And the question in my mind, and the question I think for Kentucky and for all states, is whether or not we will succeed in fully advancing that reformed and enlarged vision of quality in ways that serve our students and serve our society, or whether in fact we will end up with a rather reductive and instrumental approach to what we think college is for. And I will just note in passing that everybody is saying the students are coming in less prepared than they were, for unfortunately good reasons. And now we have a plan to get them through in 3 years. This is not a good idea for quality. So I'm not going to be lecturing about that, but I will say that as we think about what quality really means, I think we will see that we need much stronger high school preparation. Dual enrollment should not be the last they hear of their general education requirements, and there should be upper level advanced integrative learning. So the fact of the matter is that there aren't 2 or 3 buzzwords that we can use to describe the new design for quality. But basically, one of the best descriptions I have comes from yet another employer, in this case a billionaire. And he said, well, he heard me out. And he said, I think you're talking more about more big thinking, big picture thinking in the professions, and more applied learning in the arts and sciences. And I thought, this is not a bad description of what we're actually getting at. More big picture thinking, not once and done at the beginning in the first year, but big thinking threaded through the entire educational experience, along with more hands-on practical learning, so people are both applying their learning, but they're practicing the capabilities that we know they need to take with them from school and college to succeed in the economy, but also, I will argue, to contribute to our democracy. So to the handout, if you would go to page 2, one of the key shifts has been the notion of making excellence inclusive. For the longest time, what was the indicator of excellence? It's still true when you get the Ivy League admissions numbers every spring. What characterized excellence? The number of people we kept out. I mean, that has been the reigning meaning of quality in higher education. And I was a trustee at a private liberal arts college. The fact of the matter is they wanted very much to drive up their application numbers so they could keep more students out so they would be able to be high on the quality parade. But the fact of the matter is that we need quality learning for all students and across all disciplines. So you'll see this chart, which is from AACNU's strategic plan in 2013-2017. We were well into what we called the LEAP initiative at that point. But the key idea was that there were a set of learning outcomes that were a necessity for all students. They were necessary for success in a global economy, but also for informed citizenship, US and global, intellectual, personal, civic, and professional development, and that studies needed to be addressing these capabilities or outcomes across the entire educational experience, across all fields, not just in the arts and sciences. Liberal education did not belong to certain disciplines. It was everybody's portal to opportunity. We needed to think about it that way. So, and where does it happen? All schools, community colleges, universities, goals for all fields of study. Behind this is another shift that I think we started to make in the way we think about the kind of world we're preparing our students for. And here's page 3 is a handout from something from Stanford that came out, I think in 2016. The Stanford Moonshot, written by people who lead design thinking programs at Stanford. And they tried to make a distinction between school problems and real world problems. And that even where we're giving students case studies and things like that, somebody knew the right answer to them. Somebody knew what they were looking for. And that the characteristic of real world problems is that we don't know the right answer. Think about these issues we're facing now as a democracy. Is there anyone in this room who thinks they know the right answer to where we should go? I certainly do not pretend to be one of them. The most important problems are ill-defined. The right solution is not known. You're going to have to think across disciplines and between the academy and the real world in order to get solutions. Problem finding, problem framing, and engaging diverse perspectives. And I put my own little arrows on this. Students themselves have to take ownership of this process. We did interviews with focus groups with students when we were launching this LEAP initiative. And they all said they didn't know what they were supposed to, these are high school students going to college. They didn't know what they were supposed to do in college, but they'll tell us when we get there, they said very sweetly. And I thought, okay. And that's what you've been hearing about in this Student Success Initiative and in the work on the graduate profile. We do need to tell them not how to do it, but we need to guide them through processes and practices that will help them develop the ability to take ownership of their own understanding of their role in creating solutions to problems, give them practice in working on complex problems with people who think differently, people who may be from different backgrounds, but also the difference between the academy's way of thinking and people who actually work in the community. And this, I looked at this again and I thought, I don't like that guide on the side. It's a designer on the side. And that designer, bottom of the page, the role of faculty, the designer is creating assignments that help students engage in the practices that we want them to become proficient in. So to the next page, the essential learning outcomes. This was AACNU's first major pass at creating a transparent description of what we meant by essential learning, key learning outcomes. And you'll notice it's not called liberal education. I was beaten down by all my communications advisors on that. First iterations, they were called liberal education outcomes. They said, Carol, nobody will even pay attention. You need to call them essential learning outcomes. This is the business community. And that is why they are called essential learning outcomes. And all over the country, these have been used, and I see a high degree of congruence between the essential skills that Kentucky is working on right now and these outcomes. But again, the point is, it's not just certain disciplines, it's not just the first 2 years, that you're working on the broad learning, the intellectual and practical skills, personal and social responsibility, including civic and global learning and ethical reasoning and actions, and you're integrating and applying that learning to real problems whose significance the students are able to explain. They're not just doing it because we told them to. They themselves can say why this matters. So if you skip to page 6, I realize I should have changed the order of this, you will see that you'll see one of many passes that AACNU made at asking employers about this. Before there was that list, there were discussions with employers, there were focus groups with employers, there were syntheses of employer research that already existed. And we began a series of commissioned business studies that are still carried on by AACNU and have become more and more sophisticated. But essentially, the question being asked of employers was, should higher education place less, the same, or more emphasis on each of these areas of learning? And you'll see on page 6 that employers wanted us to place more emphasis on all of them. And they were particularly strong on problem solving in diverse settings, that 96% wanted more emphasis on it, 80% wanted more emphasis on integrative and applied learning. Again, not just the students know about things, but they have actually tried applying these things. And also, they believed that students should have broad knowledge in the liberal arts and sciences, that knowledge and understanding of democratic institutions and values was important, and that intercultural skills and understanding of societies and cultures outside the US were important. So this is one, I mean, you literally could track the research. The only thing that ever really changed in this research was the emphasis by employers on ethics. Before the Enron scandal, ethics was not a high priority. After the Enron scandal, up by 20 points in our surveys, and still very high. So basically, my argument here is that we have reached a kind of consensus across the academy and between academy and employers on the key skills, essential learning outcomes, whatever you call them, the capacities that students ought to be bringing with them from college that constitute quality. And the exciting thing about what's going on in Kentucky is that you're working on these. You have teams on every campus mapping exactly these skills across the curriculum. As Janet just said, you have benchmark, you have a milestone, you have capstone. So you're introducing, reinforcing, and then taking it to the highest level and assessing it and helping the students understand that this is part of what they're getting out of college. I understand this is still work in progress. I understand that it is emergent, not fully achieved, but I have not seen another state that is doing anything like this, and you ought to know how significant this is from our point of view. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. But it is one thing to define the essential skills, something else to recognize that we have a new framework for quality, making excellence inclusive, shared intentionality about essential outcomes, real-world applications, etc. But the fact of the matter is that defining it is not the same as helping students achieve these skills. So the key thing is the emphasis going on now on practices that help students actually achieve these outcomes. So back to our handout, and you can look at page 5. High-impact educational practices. Anyone in this room who's working on one or more of the high-impact practices on this page? First-year seminars, common intellectual experiences, learning communities, writing intensive, collaborative assignments and projects, undergraduate research, diversity, global learning, e-portfolios, service learning, internships, capstones. How many of you are working on one or more of those? Okay. This movement has spread across higher education. Where did it come from? Again, major association, we're getting applications every year from people who are working on reforms. And we come to see that there's a pretty standard list. And I, who tend to think in design terms, said, okay, these first year seminars should be somehow linked to the capstones. We're going to have capstones. There ought to be some connection between what we introduce at the beginning, what we ask them to do at the end. Writing across the curriculum, common intellectual experiences. These are things that you would want to have early on so that they learned how to learn in groups. Things like undergraduate research, internships, community-based learning. These are things that certainly should be there by the middle of the program and then reinforced thereon, and they could be in their majors, not just in general education. So we put together this list, but it wasn't called high-impact practices. It was called effective educational practices. And there was a long two-page footnote in the report which we released these with citing the research on every one of them. The research showed when students did these, they were more likely to learn and they were sometimes more likely to complete. And then my colleague George Koo, who was director at the time of the National Study of Student Engagement, was part of this. I had asked George, I said, can we call this list high-impact practices? He said, I don't think the research is that solid yet, so it's called effective educational practices. But he realized that NESE was collecting data from tens of thousands of students every year about whether or not they had done one or more of several of these practices. And they went back and ran 10 years of data. And they showed that when students reported that they had done one or more of these practices, they were more likely to stay in school, and they were more likely to report high levels of learning on NESE scales related to quality learning. And that there was a higher boost for students who had a higher likelihood of not finishing in school. He called it compensatory benefit. I have never seen a move. And then he called me. He said, "Did we call them high impact practices?" I said, "George, you told me not to." He said, "Well, they are high impact practices, and that is what we will call them." Now, this is September of 2008, 2007. I go to a conference that we have helped organize, led by the head of Massachusetts System of Higher Education, 3 weeks later. And he is citing this report, and he is citing the completion benefits of it. He is so excited about the fact that we can respond to the completion challenge by advancing these kinds of practices for our students. And so suddenly each of these was a separate movement. It had its own group, its own conference, its own journals, etc. All of a sudden, they're starting to see themselves as part of an effort to engage students more fully in purpose, in practice of needed skills, applications, but also learning from one another about what they're getting out of all of this. So when those of you, you're already working with it, so think about it. What do you think makes the high impact practices high impact? You're working in them. What do you think makes them worthwhile for your students? Pardon me? Okay. So we have a level up project that's all about high impact practices, and what is it that, in your view, makes them high impact? Do we?
One of the pieces is faculty mentorship. It forces the students to develop a close relationship with the person on the team.
That's right. They're very likely to be working intimately with faculty or student-facing professionals in these kinds of experiences. What else? They articulate the experiences beyond the scope of a course. They can, or they're guided to do it, see the application beyond this, getting through this one course. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
I think it challenges their thinking and encourages them to be able to articulate how they feel about a subject, whether it changes their feelings.
Right. Yeah, it challenges their thinking. And in virtually all of these, are they working on scripted problems where we know the right answer? They are not. Even writing is an unscripted challenge for somebody who's got to do it. As I still know in my senior years, it's still a challenge to put together a cogent analysis of what I'm trying to say. And that was certainly true when I was 18 or 20. So they're working on unscripted problems, and all of these things require the student's effort. The student has to do it. They can't just listen and take a multiple choice exam in the middle or at the end. So the insight from this is that these more challenging kinds of work can capture their engagement and give them a stake in their campus and their education. And that is why we should be thinking, what is the high impact practice at the early stage, reinforced at the middle stage, and taken to a higher level at the highest stage. So high impact practices are not the only strategy by any means to engage students in their own education. We need to be thinking with new intentionality about all the assignments we give them. But to me, this is the core of the revolution that we're engaged in. Not just that we have defined a set of outcomes that matter across the curriculum, but that we are thinking systemically and imaginatively about the practices that help students see why this matters to them. See why it matters to them. We're giving them a chance to speak, as several of you said. They're talking with faculty, they're talking with other students. They may be either meeting people in the community, or many of them actually live in the communities that they're working in. If they're in a community-based setting, they come to campus briefly, and then they go back to those communities. So we're inviting them to think differently about the knowledge base of the communities from which they've come. So if you have not seen it, is the list of essential skills that Kentucky is working on now, and you can compare it with the essential learning outcomes on my list. Very, very similar. And to spend a little more time on the employer value of these are more recent findings this is from National NACE. What's the acronym for? Right, National Association of Colleges and Employers. I have noticed that more and more people are using this list rather than the AACU lists, and I report this with mixed feelings. But nonetheless, it's contemporary and it's not coming from a group with an interest in this subject. They're just telling you what the employers are saying, and you will see that, in fact, employers are looking for much higher levels of people who have these capacities when they look for folks they want to hire and those they want to keep and those they want to promote. So now I want to move to something that is on this handout. When I was working with Lumina on a project on high impact practices, Lumina commissioned research from a group called DVD, looking at half a dozen of the high impact practices that NESI still has in its database. And the question was, when students report that they participated in one of these, what gains are they making on a NESI score on academic skills, and what gains are they making on practical learning skills as well? So the academic skills, writing clearly, speaking clearly and effectively, thinking critically and analytically, analyzing numerical and statistical information, all the things we think are fundamentals. But it's this practical learning scale that I just found fascinating. Because students who are involved in high impact practices say, this is their own self-report, they're acquiring job or work-related skills. They're working effectively with others. They're developing a personal code of ethics and values. They're coming to understand people of different values. They're solving complex real-world problems, which is what those employers want. And they're becoming an informed and active citizen. Those are all questions that NESI is asking. And the more students are involved in high-impact practices, the higher their scores on above and beyond students who aren't in those practices in terms of that scale. But look at which one is driving. Which one has the highest boost, as these scholars put it, on students' outcomes? This is a reading test. What's the answer? It's service learning. It's service learning. Now, service learning cannot be the only way we think about high-impact practices. I'll say more about that in a minute. But the fact of the matter is that the kind of thing that goes on in a service learning experience, students are doing some kind of a community project. It's in a course. They're getting credit for it. They're doing it in the community. They're getting, hopefully, guidance from faculty, opportunity to reflect on what they got out of it. And the benefit to their perception that they are becoming better prepared professionals, more capable of solving problems, and becoming more ethical and responsive citizens. This is huge. To my mind, these are the intended outcomes of a good college education. If you had to boil them down, I think this is the list. And the fact of the matter is that service learning is a driver in this, and that the service learning movement, which is, has been a big one in higher education for 40 years, has begun to make a real difference in students' perception of what they're getting out of the connection between their education and the real world beyond college. So back to my handout, we now have page 7. We have employer support for high applied learning practices. And then some of you will have seen this report that's floating around the conference, Every Student, Every Degree. A couple of you are holding it. And in that report, we took some more recent research from AACU, literally put the entire list of high impact practices in there and showed that employers are significantly more likely to hire students who've had these practices, all of them, not just the service learning. But internships, right at the top, senior projects, writing intensive courses, collaborative research, community-based service learning, all of these, the faculty, an employer said, we're much more likely or somewhat more likely to hire someone who's had these experiences. Now, one of the things I notice is that internships is right up at the top. This is what employers want to see, and this is what students want to do. We know that. But internships didn't give that much of a boost to either the academic or the practical skills. What do we make of that? Yes?
I think it's less directly guided by faculty, right? If students go into an internship, maybe they're getting academic credit, maybe they're not. That service learning issue you talked about is built within the curriculum.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the truth of the matter is I don't know the answer to this, but we're all looking at an authentic problem, and we can think together about it. I think that is a very good answer, that one has faculty guidance encouraging the students to reflect on what they saw in the real-world application, and one doesn't. or I was just talking with a private university in DC recently. It turns out 90% of their students have have public internships in public agencies in the federal government. This may not be true next year, but it's been true historically. And these folks were worried that the students just see the campus as a place to sleep on their way downtown, as they put it. And so I said, well, we could think about employing some of the practices that we know work in service learning for internships. Suppose that every student who was in an internship had a chance to come back to his or her department and talk about some of the issues they saw there, some of the ethical questions, some of the social responsibility questions, perhaps some of the diversity, inclusion, and disparity questions that they undoubtedly saw. If we gave them a chance to think more deeply about what they learned from that and to talk with one another, maybe they would be getting more powerful benefits from it in terms of those academic and practical skills that are so obvious in the service learning. And this leads us to a more general point, that the fact of the matter is that every one of the high impact practices that's on page 5 in your handout could be tweaked to include civic and ethical questions. So we could be tweaking the first year seminars and experiences. In fact, our speaker this morning, Angela Christie, was talking about exactly that, tweaking first year orientations, which is required in the school where she teaches, so that students are thinking about career questions, but the fact of the matter is they could be thinking about democracy questions too. They could be asked to think about what are some of the societal questions that you would like to explore during your education. And let's do some initial writing in the writing courses on them, or in the learning communities. Or we can give collaborative assignments where students are working on families of projects, families of questions that are important to them. The notion is that you could turn all of the high impact practices into more socially aware, collaborative, ethically attentive practices than may be the case in some instances. So that's the big framework for thinking about quality. And to summarize what I've said thus far, civically engaged HIPs spur increased engagement and completion. Students who participate in civically engaged HIPs, the service learning, but also other active HIPs, more likely to persist and complete college, more likely to report higher levels of civic motivation and engagement, report higher levels of personal and social responsibility and belonging. So this is my exhortation to Kentucky, which is doing such fabulous work both on attainment and on quality. How can we bring these together so that we are braiding the civic work, the quality work and the student success work together? And how can we make sure that civic projects and questions are part of this? So the key, I would argue, and certainly this is what Aaron briefly and Tristan Denley at more length was saying, the key is pathways. Designing pathways that introduce key subjects, that reinforce them, and that give students a chance to demonstrate what they have learned across the way. So pathway thinking is basically the breakthrough idea along with high impact practices in quality learning, that we are designing pathways, not just a course, not just an assignment, but journeys through college that are helping students discover what they need to take with them, know that they are practicing, and that involve multiple HIPs to help them work on inquiry and problem solving across the curriculum in general education and in majors. So this is a sample pathway. I'll come back to it in a minute. We'll talk about it more in a minute. But it's the idea of introducing problem solving early on, reinforcing it at a higher level, certainly by the second year in an actual field project, and then making sure that that problem solving becomes part of what they're doing in their advanced studies, and that their capstones actually show that they've gained the capacities to grapple with unscripted problems. So now to my third topic, which is exploring civic learning for student success and for democracy success. So basically, argument thus far, we have a new framing of what we mean by quality and the practices that produce it. the fact of the matter is when we work on quality, students are more likely to complete than not. So it's a certain success strategy. But what about civic learning and social responsibility as key components of our quality work? And of course, is civic learning included in this essential skills that Kentucky has put together? This is a question. I see 2 people nodding. Is it? I want to see everybody nodding because the answer is yes. Pardon me? It's really, exactly right. It is number 7. I will go back and find that list, which I did not dwell on. There they are, number 7. Engage in civic life to improve society. And I particularly like the graceful wording of that. Engage in civic life. Why? To make a better tomorrow, to make a better world for all of us to live in. So, but the other point that I want to make is that while contributing to civic life has been separated out as one of the 10 essential skills, and apparently employers have signed off on this, according to Aaron, the fact of the matter is that all 10 of the skills in the Kentucky graduate profile build the capacities that you need in civil society and in democratic problem solving. So in page 8 of your handout, you have something that I've been working on recently with my colleagues in the Civic Learning and Democracy Engagement Coalition. It's an answer to the question, what is it we want students to get out of civic learning and democracy engagement in college? And broadly speaking, we discovered as we dug into this that there were really 4 or 5 different movements that were all moving forward together under the label civic engagement. So one is the notion that students need and deserve the opportunity to develop agency in their own world, voice, belonging, civic purpose, social power. I'm quoting a faculty member in New York. He said, a lot of my students come here thinking that they are people to whom things happen. And I want them to leave here believing that they can make things happen. And that is what I am aiming for on my course on freedom and citizenship, which includes a project where all the students are working together on issues they care about. So that's one, and it's the centerpiece of our framework. But secondly, there's a movement to put courses on constitutional democracy and core texts into the required curriculum. There were 12 states or so a couple of years ago that were already doing that. More are joining the pack. I literally just got a report this morning I haven't had time to look at from Educational Commission of the States updating me on how many states actually have this requirement either in place or in the making. And that's an important movement that needs to be part of our thinking. Action projects, service learning, but more generally work on community challenges at home and abroad, a big theme in the civic engagement movement. And then what I call needed skills, productive engagement across difference, civil discourse, civil dialogue, but also collaborative problem solving. There's a big movement now across many states to have students practice civil discourse, and you may already know or have heard from me this morning that SUNY has now declared that all 64 of its 2- and 4-year schools, including trade schools, and 1 million students will demonstrate proficiency in civil discourse in order to get a degree, which is a very big thing. But it's not the only thing, and the fact of the matter is that SUNY is not nearly as far along in mapping this into the curriculum as you are in Kentucky, mapping the various skills that you're working on into the curriculum. So the framework draws these multiple purposes together. Students' own journeys stand at the center. The hope and expectation is that the way we organize the curriculum will give students multiple opportunities to say, what are issues that you care about, that you would like to address in your society? And they can be technical issues, they can be road repair issues, they can be constitutional democracy issues, but the question is we need to ask them. We need to ask them early, and we need to help them understand that their studies can build their knowledge and their skill and their experience, that high impact practice experience in working on those problems. We want them to make their own choices. It is not up to us to proselytize and tell the students what to think about what's going on in their society, but it is up to us to give them opportunities to name what they see in their society and to talk together and to think together with guided readings across all points on the spectrum provided by us. Ultimately, the hope is that the students will see ways to contribute to society beyond voting. Voting is foundational, but we're not just talking about voting. We're talking about people who are willing to dig in their communities or in their professions to solve problems that they see as important. So the framework centers democracy, picking up on that constitutional text movement, core text movement, at the very top, democratic knowledge and levers for change. And I will argue that democracy has been the most neglected part of the various civic movements moving forward. I mean, and now I think a lot of people are thinking about democracy, but it is very hard to find required courses in the curriculum on democracy at any institution, and we have been actively looking in the CLDE coalition. So we center democracy, US and global. We connect engagement across difference with the problem solving that I've been talking about. So civil discourse isn't an end in itself. It becomes part of their work in actually testing, trying to invent and test and apply and learn from their efforts, practical experience in solving problems. And it connects civic and ethical inquiry to students' career plans so that even if we introduce all this in general education, hopefully threaded from first to final year, we reinforce it in whatever they have chosen as their own field, which in their own minds is very likely their perception of their key, their portal to the future. So this is the framework. And if you look at page 9 of your handout, and look at the bridge building column, bridge building and problem solving, I think what you're going to see there is something that looks stunningly similar to the Kentucky Essential Skills. And we did not develop these together. I simply, in preparing for this, I noticed, oh my goodness, those essential skills, they're all on our list here on this page. And why is that? Because two things. One, there's a consensus that these skills are necessary for strong preparation for a fast-changing world. But secondly, because as soon as we think about solving any problem, we realize that all the skills you have on that Kentucky list are necessary to solving problems. Communication skills, critical inquiry, evidence-based reasoning, digital data and media literacy, attention to disinformation. We are drowning in disinformation. Do students know how to separate out what is arguably valid from something that has simply been made up in some corner of the dark universe and foisted upon us? Productive engagement with diverse views and experiences. This is what employers have been saying for years they want. Problem solving with diverse partners. Ethical reasoning. I already told you it soared up 20 years ago after the Enron scandal. So, and then purpose and agency and a strong sense of who you are, what you're bringing to the table. So all these capacities we've been talking about as a community necessary for quality also turn out to be integral to the bridge building and problem solving skills that we want students to bring with them, not just into the workplace, but into a democracy that is deeply divided and in a lot of trouble. So here, again, I mentioned this quickly, but I want to go deeper into it now. We're really talking about pathway thinking and talking about pathway design for very different situations. The first pathway that we developed is the one I already showed you. We wove problem solving and civic inquiry and social responsibility into a 4-year curriculum, knowing that a lot of students are coming in with their gen eds out of the way from high school one way or another. We put in democracy as an upper level study as well. We have students working on civic problem solving related to their majors in the advanced work, and then students doing some kind of culminating project that also gives them a chance to think about ethical questions as well as career related questions. Well, people who looked at this from community colleges said this will not do for us. This may possibly speak to the transfer curriculum, but a lot of our students are in technical programs and are in some of them are in certificate programs as well. So they're in programs that are designed for 2 years. They're designed to be self-sustaining, to send them directly into the marketplace. Maybe they transfer, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of the students in the career and technical programs aren't planning to transfer. They may have come here while they're working. They may be planning to work as soon as they finish the program. And so the question that people were asking, community college group worked on this, is how do we make sure that there are opportunities to work on all the goals for civic learning in these career and technical programs. And so you will see that civil discourse is introduced early on in a first year program of study course, that you can introduce controversies in those courses in different technical fields and give students a chance to practice civil discourse in those activities. Now, I'm told that all the technical programs in Kentucky will have a writing requirement. Is that true? I know there's a lot of people from technical schools in the room. Pardon me?
Degrees and diplomas.
Yeah, not certificates. Okay. So it's a really hard one if you've designed a program that doesn't have any writing, for students to write and think about their role in society. And I kind of overrode the group and put writing in anyway, because the fact of the matter is students deserve an opportunity to learn communication skills, even in the very shortest term programs that they're working on. And so that's a place where they can be thinking about and writing about and talking about working on their role in society. Then we would create, and there's a various set of options here. It might be a workshop, it might be an extracurricular program, it might be something that's actually integral to the 2-year degree, where they're really working on civic and democracy skills and reinforcing those and thinking about how they would make solutions to problems they want to solve in their society. And then at the upper level, opportunities in the program of study courses, not in gen ed, but just program of study for ethical reflection, for guided reflection, for civic inquiry in a practicum that may be part of the technical program, probably is part of it, and then some kind of problem solving where they are working on an issue they know is important to their field. They're presenting a plan for resolving it to a group, an external group that might look at it. All these ways of threading civic inquiry, ethical reflection, and dialogue across difference and hands-up application into the programs that they see as their opportunities for gainful employment, but they become braided opportunities where they're working both on their job skills and on their responsibilities to one another in the workplace, in the community, and in our democracy. So that is the basic idea. Quality is the new frontier for student success. It's time for us to broaden the meanings of student success beyond attainment, beyond the measures we're just looking at now, which are important. I'm not saying they're not important, but they're insufficient. We need to know whether students can even name the skills they ought to be taking with them from college. Are they demonstrating, as Kentucky is setting out to enable you to do, to show that they are taking with them capacities that will help them make change in the economy, but also in society. And civic learning in the world's most influential democracy needs to be a quality priority. I have to think there's some connection between the fact that for the last 40 years, higher education's civic mission has been largely ignored in public policy. The workforce has become the only thing we talk about. I think there's a connection between that and the mess we're in as a society. I will never be able to prove that, but I believe it. And I think the fact of the matter is we are in a mess as a society. And I'll make my final point and then I'll stop. The fact of the matter is, as you've already heard, a great majority of high school graduates are going to college in Kentucky. And nationally, it's over 60% go directly from high school to college. And if you look at the number of adults who have either a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree, this is Lumina figures, or a certificate that has value in the economy, it's 55%. So the fact of the matter is that the majority of Americans are spending time on our campuses, which gives us an opportunity to influence the kinds of questions they're asking about what democracy could be so that it works better for them, for one another, for us. And the fact of the matter is that there are 40 million additional students who have some college and no degree. If you put together the 55% who have credentials with 40 million, it's over 70%. It's over 70%. So the fact of the matter is we've had this huge opportunity. We need to seize it. Our democracy is in trouble. And as we think about the meanings of student success, educating students to prepare solutions for the future, those solutions need to include democracy as well as the jobs that they hope to achieve as they come to your campuses to get an education. So thank you very much. I'm delighted to take questions, and I know I marched you through a lot of information, but I enjoyed doing it. I hope it was useful to you. We have just a few minutes, I think, for questions or comments or suggestions for improvement. And I'm happy to answer the question. Yes, okay. Can you speak up?
I talk quietly. You had mentioned a few minutes ago about a report that you had gotten from the states to talk about different things. Can you tell me what that was? I was interested in.
Yes, it's a report. I haven't talked about the Civic Learning and Democracy Engagement Coalition because it takes several minutes to do it, and I wanted to really go into quality. But the coalition has been formed by educational groups and policy groups, including SHIO, the State Higher Education Executive Officers. And they went to the Education Commission of the states to find out how many states now require a college course in U.S. government or core texts or something related to the Constitution. And so I literally just got that report this morning, and I have not opened it. But I'm happy to send it to Jana when I do. It's not secret information. So you can see, as I said, what this report was done for us a couple of years ago. I think there were 10 or 11 states. I know there are more states that have been added because we've been talking to them. They've been joining our work. But that's what I was referring to. Okay, and thanks for clarifying it. Yes, and tell me who you are.
Steve Hillhouse from Ashland Community Technical College. So I'm going back to my 80s when I was an undergraduate, all the way till now, and listening to some of these things.
Okay,
So-
he's going back to the 80s when he was an undergraduate.
When I was an undergraduate. And it seems to me that the same things have been said, a disconnect between the business world and the education world. My professors talked about that when I was in school. You know, this is school, and when you go to work, it's going to be different. So why, after all these years, has nothing really ever changed? All of these terms, all of these things, there's still that disconnect, because I concluded the business world, whether it's global companies or local mom and pop shops, they want us to do it all. They want us to do it all. And if we move toward these soft skills, then one of these days they're going to say, gosh, I need somebody who can do accounting. They don't know anything about accounting. I need somebody who can do electricity. They don't know anything about electricity.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're never going to make them happy.
Right. You've raised a really important question. I don't agree with you, but I'm glad you raised it because it gives us a chance to explore different perceptions, and yours are obviously just as valid as mine. You're talking to employers too, I imagine. What do you teach?
I mean, I used to teach accounting.
You used to teach accounting. Okay, so when we began the work on quality at AACU, we had focus groups with employers, we had an advisory group of employers, et cetera, et cetera. I went into that believing that employers wanted one thing and good educators wanted another. I really did. And over time, I came to realize that employers weren't using our vocabulary, but they were asking for some capacities that actually were important to me as an historian. Critical thinking, evidence-based reasoning, can communicate, et cetera, et cetera. But to your point, what about the actual knowledge? Can they do accounting? What we were told again and again and again, and Aaron repeated it earlier this afternoon, is that the employers are saying, you're sending us people who have the technical skills. They don't have these transferable skills. They don't have, whether they call it soft skills or the things that enable them to work with others to get things done. That's what they're lacking in. So we surveyed employers again and again and again. So were they looking for students who had great strength and technical skills basic to the field in which they were being hired, or broad learning only, or broad learning plus technical skills? And overwhelmingly, employers would say they were looking for the first. And if you go back to my handout, page 2, this definition of liberal education, an approach to college learning that empowers individuals, prepares them to deal with complexity, diversity, and change, emphasizes broad knowledge, in-depth field in a field of interest, sense of social responsibility, as well as strong intellectual and practical skills, and names them. and a demonstrated ability to apply knowledge and skills in real-world settings. This description, without the term liberal education, was given to thousands of employers over several surveys. And the question was, would you hire somebody who had had this kind of an education? And typically 80% would say yes. I don't remember the exact figures. Would you recommend this kind of education to your own child? 97%. This is what employers wanted for their own child. They learned to be accountants, but they were learned to be accountants who had a bigger understanding of the world in which they were doing accounting, some sense of social responsibility, and a demonstrated ability to pull the big picture thinking and the actual skills together to get something done. So that's how I see it. Now, you may feel like you're being pushed as a faculty member, former faculty member, to downplay the actual accounting, and I can't speak to that. That's your own perception, I think. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, to me, they want it all. They want it all.
Yeah.
We've been trying to provide that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I went to an accounting program. I learned how to critically think and do all of those things. I just think that we're chasing something sometimes that, it's just difficult to ever
Mm-hmm.
achieve.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think we forget that employers have a responsibility too. I mean, they have employees,
Right.
broken.
Right. I agree completely.
They have a
Yeah.
job too.
Yeah.
And it seems like sometimes it's like we've got to produce this perfect person.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Right. Well, look at that thing I gave you. This one. The students think they're becoming really rather wonderful people. The student is saying, I gained job skills, I gained civic skills, I gained ethical skills, I learned how to solve problems, I have a better understanding of people different from myself. This is based on, tens of thousands of students in our colleges and universities who think that they're getting this out of their education. So I take your point. Employers have been outsourcing professional development to you, no question. And that is a bad thing. But I don't think the things we are trying to do now to braid quality learning across the curriculum in all programs and to connect it to accounting or to nursing or to teacher education or to engineering or digital technology, I don't think those are bad developments. I really do think that this is a new frontier for quality learning, and that it's a whole lot better than breadth and depth. Get your broad learning out of the way as fast as possible and forget it, and then burrow into one field of study. This is not a good design, but it is. I like to say, I'm an historian, it was the latest thing in 1909. It's not what we need in 2025 and going beyond. So Jana, am I running over time? I am. All right. I'm perfectly happy to take informal questions if you want to come up, and thank you for raising yours. I appreciate it.